Welcome to the workshop designed for experienced ESOL people, for new trainers in training, directors of studies, academic managers. So this is about giving feedback on well-managed but low agency learning, so where you've observed a class with this happening. Before we go on, all the materials are on bellhoptsol.com. There's lots of handouts. There's a full handout for this session. And you can also see the material. This is taken from my book on Masterclass TESOL Lesson Observation Feedback. Okay, so that's where you can get the handouts and worksheets. So what we'll cover today, we'll look at what is low agency learning, what do we actually mean, why it matters, the challenge, so when good management hides passivity, things for the observer to look out for. How do you know that this is what you're seeing? How do you provide constructive feedback that allows the teacher to actually create change, and practical ongoing strategies to help the teachers? Okay, so the reason I've chosen this topic is because it's often beguiling. It's very easy to watch a class with, poor classroom management or low pace. Those things are easy to identify and you can immediately work out what the teacher needs. However, these lessons are often, not always, deceptive. So you may be watching the lesson and you see good pace, there's a logical flow, the classroom management is efficient, people do what they're supposed to do, there's not too much time setting up or on tasks. The teacher may express clear knowledge about the language that they're teaching. There's usually a well-chosen range of tasks, although I would say often this is running the course book and just running through the sequence as in the course book. However, you're observing this and you're thinking, this doesn't feel right. And often it's quite hard to articulate why you don't feel the lesson's quite right. So your challenge is to identify the problem, but to provide supportive, actionable feedback. So let's have a look at this. A quick check of meaning. What do I mean by student agency? So who has control and decision-making power during the lesson? What this really means is ask yourself, did the students you saw being taught have any impact on the progression of the lesson whatsoever? Or is it almost like the lesson didn't need them because the teacher was going to take the same actions, whatever? So we'll look at that a bit more. There is a lot of crossover with student-centred teaching. They're not so different. However, I would argue that the student-centred teaching is more a philosophy towards the whole lesson and the creation of tasks and the focus being on the students as opposed to the teacher. But a lesson can be student-centred in design, but still have low agency in delivery. So can students and their ability affect the progression of the lesson? What's it look like? So the students are passive. They're not active within the lesson. They're often well behaved. They know what to do. They can predict the tasks. You come into the classroom and it feels quite ordered. And they complete tasks. They get on with the job. Yet they're not genuinely thinking. They're not choosing. They're not making choices. And they have no direction in their own learning. So they can't stop the process and say, hang on, what about if I try this? Or, well, what would I say in this situation? Or, can you explain that again? Or, I'm not clear about that. So the lesson is done to them. Okay? So lesson's done to them rather than with them. So why does it matter? Well, it's proven effective best practice. If students have agency, they learn better, they remember more, they are participating and involved in their own learning. Always going to lead to happier classes and better language learning. Interestingly, students want it even if they can't articulate why. And the articulation is often around, well, the class is boring. It's not, the class isn't for me. It's just not the right class for me. You might see poor retention rates. Students tend not to go back to these classes. Or sometimes you get self-blame. It depends on the culture you're working in. Oh, the teacher's great, but I'm not very good at learning. I'm not a good language learner. It's my fault. I just can't do that kind of thing. So the bottom line is, without agency, students perform tasks. With agency, they develop as thinkers and language users. With agency, they bring themselves to the classroom, their thoughts, their personalities. So you're watching the lesson. What are you seeing? How do you know it's low agency when you observe it? Well, all the communication flows to the teacher. Invariably, therefore, it is usually quite teacher-centred, particularly on task feedbacks. Students only speak when they're nominated or told that they can speak. They may be called out to answer questions. The teacher asks all the questions. Students don't ask any. And invariably, it's well worth looking at the types of questions the teachers are asking. Invariably, the teacher already knows the answers to the questions. They are display questions. So this verb here, is it stative or whatever? Does it take the ing form? So the teacher knows the answers and they're kind of checking to see that you agree with the teacher questions. In pair work, often the teacher doesn't monitor or support, or I should say, assess the students. So often the teacher sets up the task and they might go and do the register, prepare the cards for the next activity, stand back and make sure everybody's working. But the teacher is not engaged at the monitoring stage. And so therefore they're not using the monitoring stage to assess what students can or can't do. Okay. Task completion is valued over learning. Yes, we got through 5 tasks. Well done. We've finished page 22. Great. Not, have you learned anything? The class is mostly in lockstep. Everybody doing the same thing at the same time. We're all going to do exercise 6. You've got 3 minutes. Okay. Can Jose and Suzanne speed up, please, because everybody else is finished and we're waiting for them. So the class is like an army. They move together in the same pace. Okay. So on the other hand, what would it look like if the students have got high agency? They would ask genuine questions. Yeah. They would try to use the language from their own perspective and they would engage in a dialogue about meaning with the teacher. They would disagree or alternate views, or can I say this, or but I wouldn't say that, or how does this sound? So they tussle over meaning. Personal examples are offered, and the teacher uses those personal examples as the basis of content. The teacher builds on the peers, they build on each other's ideas, and the teacher also builds on their ideas. There's spontaneous use of the language. How does this sound? It moves beyond the controlled practice a lot. So low agency is there's a lot of controlled practice usually going on. A high agency lesson feels messy. Students are not in lockstep. There's high energy. They're moving. They're moving at different paces. They're trying to do different things. So it's a bit of a more, rather than a very refrained waltz, this is more of a bit of a 70s, 80s head-banging disco feel to it. God, you can tell my age. Okay. So, you've watched the lesson and you need to think, how am I going to feed back on this? This needs to change. What can I do? So, work out what percentage of the lesson involved genuine student choice, if any. Try and note it. Find it on the plan. Look for it in your feedback notes. What evidence did you see of the students thinking? And I mean it in a Bloom's taxonomy way, a slightly higher level. Look at the EFL advanced YouTube page for teaching on the Bloom's taxonomy. So is there high order thinking? Are high order activities? Are students really engaged in working it out? Or is it a case of with controlled practice they either know it or they don't? And how would you describe the balance between control and agency, having seen the lesson? Because the teacher wants to know this. If this is the basis of your feedback, you need to be really clear what you're saying. So, supporting the teacher. First, step number 1 is always the same. Get written reflection from the teacher before oral feedback. You can find on the website Bellhop a teacher's reflection document. Try to get them to do it because this will tell you key information. It will tell you if they are aware of the issue or not, to what level their awareness is, which in turn allows you to sort of pitch your feedback. So the teacher reflection is a massively important document. And sometimes what I've done is the teacher's given me back their reflection before the feedback, and I can see it's absolutely way off. So I may at that point actually give it back to them with some very clear questions like, how could you have empowered the students here? How could you have extended it to make it more appropriate for these students? I will do this. And the teacher, of course, then realises that's the direction of the feedback. But at least you give them time to have a think about it and work out what they want to say. So the written feedback, the reflective document, can be really useful. Okay, consider your teacher experience and context. So a new teacher, hey ho, they will have done a great job on classroom management. So celebrate that success. If they've got students all moving in lockstep and they're doing things great. However, you recognise this was good, but now is the time to raise the bar. So you're going to offer gentle guidance on agency. In a minute, we'll look at staging the feedback. Experienced teacher. Yeah, this might be a little bit harder. They may be more resistant to change. They think they've cracked the teaching code. Students do as they're told, they go through the process, they follow the course book, and the teacher tells them what they don't know. So they may see management as mastered and therefore teaching as mastered. But in the sort of developmental stages of learning to be a teacher, the first thing you need to do is get your presence. Can you actually stand up? Have you got a voice? The next part is, can you instruct people to do things? And can you work with pace? And the very end of it is, can you respond to the students and incorporate what they say into your lesson? So somebody who's got management mastered, has got the pace okay, got the instructions and knows something about language, is moving up the skill scale, but I would argue it's probably only around the halfway mark if development is a linear line. However, many people see that as the end game. It gets complicated, but part of this will be on their perception of the role of the teacher and the role that they feel comfortable in. Now, in this case, you've got to bear in mind the cultural and institution expectations. In the past, I don't know, it's still the same. In Korea, I knew teachers who were given a lectern and there was a square drawn around the lectern on the stage out, and they weren't allowed to step out of that, and they were given a microphone and told to do the job. So that's very difficult. In classrooms in Thailand, I've seen where it's open plan. You may have 4 classes going off in one big room. And so the teachers can't let their class get too noisy and disorganised because it absolutely messes everybody else up. So keep those things in mind. However, your goal, if possible, is to create more agency for the students. Okay. So build your case. You want the teacher to change, you need to provide good evidence. So time allocations. When you're going into your observation, take a pen, take a stopwatch if you have to. How much time is spent teacher talking? How much is student talking? Note the types of questions that are asked. If they're all referential, not so useful. Again, look on YouTube, our channel on YouTube, for role of the teacher, and there's types of questions in there. Look at who initiated the interactions. Was it always the teacher, or did the student sometimes do it? Who controlled the choice points? Choice being, do we move on or do we keep going? Look at the quantity and quality of the student language. Was it all about controlled practice, or were the students able to choose in any sense what they could say? And how did the teacher decide to move on from one task to the next, and why? Was it done just on the basis of watch? Was it done on the basis of scanning? Or was it done on the basis of knowledge of where they were, the students, on the task? Okay. Concrete strategies. Okay. So low risk stuff that help the teacher to improve agency. Start looking at guided discovery. Instead of teacher explaining, create it into a problem that students work in pairs and solve on their own. Okay. Can tasks be made more cooperative? So again, shift off the teacher, get them working in small groups, get them giving each other feedback, get them correcting each other's work, so that you can filter out, so the teacher only deals with what needs to be dealt with. Yeah, get students giving each other feedback. Go to the plan. If it's a new teacher, it's very likely that the aims are to the moon, if they exist at all. The weaker the aim, generally the weaker the lesson. So look at our module on lesson planning. But it very, very often teachers struggle with stage aims. If they don't know the aim of what they're doing, then it's very easy to sort of take over and just run through it from the front as a teacher. Look at the relationship with the course book. Is the teacher religiously following it step by step by step? Which just, these are very, very generic things. And they're very faulty. They don't have lots of practice, particularly to your students. And of course they can't. And also they're very low on freer practice activities. The nature of the material means that they can't do that. So how much is your teacher adapting the course book and adding to it, or omitting things? Okay, medium level. Okay, so before you say to the students, today we're going to look at the present perfect. So begin with, what do you already know about the present perfect? Tell me what you know and I'll tell you what you don't know. So one of the guiding principles that we use for our courses is ask before tell. Before you tell students anything, ask them if they already know it. Yeah, you don't need, so for example, I have seen Peter, so subject, auxiliary verb, the verb in the past participle, object. Yeah, but that's one way I can say that as a teacher. But if I'm going to do ask before tell, I say, okay, if that's this subject, what sort of forms this? What's this? What's this? So a much increased engagement, and it becomes a diagnostic tool. Yeah, ask students what they want to do more. Ask them, they can do tasks in different ways. You don't have to work in lockstep. The better students might write the comprehension questions on the text for the weaker students who answer them, for example. Ask students to create their own questions. If you've got a reading text, ask them to create a question. Ask them to create tasks and questions rather than it always come from the teacher or the book. Yeah, so I want to talk about the present perfect. So, Peter, tell me something that you have experienced this week. So and get the example from Peter of a real life example and work with that rather than the one from the book. Okay? All right. And then moving on. What is success? Here we're asking students, what do you want? What do you want to be able to do with that language? Let me know how you're feeling about it. Do you feel that you can use it? What do you need in order to be able to use it better? Yeah. Get feedback from students about what their needs are, how they want to learn, what they require from you. Not always easy. Students, it sounds great, but students are not in the habit and they're very hard to articulate it, but it can be done. Design tasks with meaningful choices. The tasks that are designed with them as people in mind, not just the course book. Yeah, create space. So, for example, you could put on the board, I have seen Peter and I have danced in Rome, and ask them to write questions for each other about the construction of the grammar or why this was used in this way or what the meaning is. Get them to do the teaching work much more. Yeah, move out of the course book. Really, try looking at teaching without, if you're really pushing the boat out, start teaching, being responsive to students. So rather than being proactive, you want to shift into being reactive. So come in, right. So next week, I want you to come into the classroom and tell me a situation where you operated in English, but you would like to have done it better, for example. Work with that. So abandoning the course book it depends if you're allowed to or not, but can work. But look at alternatives. Okay. So remember, your goal isn't to overwhelm the teacher, but plant seeds for growth. One small change. Change is incremental, for sure. This is what we found for new observers. They're often overly impressed by smooth delivery, especially if they've just seen a whole series of terrible lessons where classroom management and rapport and pace and teacher talk with the issues. And then you see someone come on who can sort of manage the class and is quite slick. You kind of go, oh, that's amazing, until you start thinking about the content. So students doing it doesn't mean they're engaged with it. So don't confuse compliance with engagement. You can be bowled over by this sort of teacher who's operating really smoothly. However, focus on the learners. Are they learning? Are they engaged? We all do it. Try to narrow down your feedback points. Don't give too much feedback at once or too many things to work on. And keep in mind the realities of that teacher and their context, and also how, are they working online? Are they working face to face? What country? What are the requirements of the institution? They can be quite fixed, particularly highly branded learning centres where they have this sort of fixed methodology which they sell their courses based on. So always remember that. Okay, final word. Be kind. Remember, change is incremental. Look to bellhoptsol.com notes for a sample of what to say and feedback. It's all on there. All different elements will help you. Remember to follow up a few days later. How's it going? Are you making any progress? Do you feel the students got a bit more control? What happened? Did the atmosphere change? And good luck. And thanks for coming this far. Reach out if we can help you. Mail us. I like making these things. So we definitely have got situations you'd like me to address. So absolutely will do. Thank you.